We are both here and we're just going to dive into this little AMA. We are doing this partially because of our Patreon, and we're introducing some new features within our existing, I'm seeing laughing emojis. So,
well, goody.
So our Patreon, do you want to talk about what you're going to start adding to our Patreon offerings, Autumn?
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to be doing a monthly kind of like office hours, as it were, or tea, but you supply your own tea or cocktail, beverage of your choice, and sit down for about an hour once a month and just have a conversation about whatever may interest those who are on the call, whether it is about my experience in garment design and production, specifically about corsetry. Maybe we'll talk about Bridgerton because that's just the thing that everybody's talking about right now. Perhaps we'll talk about my cat because we love him so. We'll just see what happens. But that will be at our, which levels is it, Marianne?
That is for, I believe it's for our busk level patrons.
Mm-hmm. Busk and? It's like
busk and brochet.
Busk and brochet, yeah.
Busk and up.
Exactly so. So we're hoping to encourage more Patreon patronage because it allows us to do really wonderful things in addition to, the daily work of providing high quality corsets for our clients, but to also use our imaginations a little bit more and innovate, create new styles, do all of these photo shoots that supply the content that we need to create for everyone to keep seeing the daily dose of Dark Garden beauty. So here we are. We're going to do a little conversation.
Yeah, and I think this also relates to something that you started on your Facebook a little bit. You did your little you ask, I answer, and the answers are going on the Patreon, and that is for our I think it's bone level and up. Now I'm trying to remember the names of the levels, but it's basically our entry level access point is Autumn's little corset posts, and so she'll be using some of these you ask, I answers to fill in, so that it's not just pure stream of conscious from her, exciting and enticing though that may be.
Sometimes you don't want to see what's going on in there. Sometimes it's best to just leave a little mystery. So we reached out to you guys, Instagram followers, for things that you would love to know about, I don't know, again, what's in here. And we had some fantastic questions. So we're excited to talk about that. And because I really have a heck of a time just speaking into the void, as it were, Marianne has agreed to have a conversation with me about these questions rather than putting it all on me, just stream of consciousness, because we don't want to, I don't want to bonk. Someone has just asked, where am I from? I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I grew up in Santa Cruz, but I ran away from home at 15 and moved to San Francisco, and San Francisco is my home. So that's me.
Oh, we have a third guest in the stream. Say hello
Yay,
to Betsy.
Betsy.
Go away.
Hello, everyone. So welcome.
Okay.
We really miss Dickens Fair. That was just such an incredible event for us on so many levels. We got to meet people from far and wide and introduce corsetry to all walks of life, really. We really, really missed that and had hoped to return to Dickens Fair in 2020, but of course, 2020 is the year that didn't exist. So hopefully 2021, we will be able to be back out there.
I want nouns again. People's, places, things. I'm ready.
Yes. absolutely ready for that.
All right, should we kick off with the first question?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we're just going to dive right in. Someone asked, can you share any corset construction tips? That is so open-ended. What do you have to say?
I have to say that the most important thing with corset making is extreme accuracy. That comes, I will often talk about grain line. I do posts about this every now and again. Sometimes when I'm super annoyed and we're cutting out a corset and the fabric is off grain. So grain, fabric is woven with fibers warp and weft. They join sort of like this. Here we go outside of the comments. And if one of those, if it's kind of at a diagonal, then your corset may twist around the body. And that can not only look bad, but be incredibly detrimental for your spine. So making sure that you're being spot on for how you're cutting out the corset. It's why we cut our corsets single layer. So what that means is rather than stacking up 2, 4, 20, 100 pieces of fabric and then cutting, which is what they do in mass production, we're actually cutting each piece of fabric that goes into the corset one at a time, and that is lining as well as the exterior fabric. And we also are interfacing our fabrics, and that has to go onto the fabric also perfectly aligned. So that's one piece of the extreme accuracy that's incredibly important. And the other one is that your seam lines, seam allowance are spot on. Because if you're sewing something and your seam allowance, that's the distance from where you want to sew to the edge of your fabric. If that is off by a 1/16 of an inch, it doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you have 4 to 12 seams, suddenly that really makes a big difference. So a lot of our corsets have basically five places per side. So 10 seams total times a 1/16 of an inch. That's almost an inch, right? My math right? Anyway, occasionally I actually go around the workroom with a ruler and make sure that the seam guides on the sewing machines are consistent. When we get new rulers, we make sure that each ruler agrees with the rest of our rulers. We also occasionally have to check out our tape measures, because sometimes they show up and they're not spot on. So if you're measuring a person with an inch that is actually an inch and a little bit, then it's not going to agree with your paper, which then doesn't agree with your fabric, which then you end up with things that don't all line up. So there's my answer.
Short and sweet, huh?
Yeah. Accuracy.
All right. Let's give you a slightly easier one, maybe. How do I pick a size?
You asked how to pick a size, not a style, didn't you? So that can be short and sweet. We, in general, recommend that you measure your waist and subtract 4 inches. And that will be your corset size. And that actually interprets to about a 2-inch waist reduction, because we also recommend a 2-inch gap in the back of your corset. Better, shorter, sweeter?
Much shorter. Here's another long one, though. How do you balance creative work, running a business, and community outreach?
It feels like a tightrope or a slack rope. If you happen to know the difference of what it's like to be on either of those things, a tightrope, you just need balance. A slack rope, you need extreme balance. And we talk a lot about the juggling of plates and the feeding of cats. I actually find it quite challenging to keep all of those things in balance, and it is a practice, kind of like doing yoga. I'm always working towards having a consistency of schedule, and that's challenging for me. Creativity comes and goes. I try to take care of my physical being so that my emotional and mental being is healthier. And then that can lead to enough brain space to also be creative. But the creativity is the first thing that goes. Balance. when the other things are too demanding. So I think that circles back, like the short answer, good physical practice.
So speaking of demanding, what is the hardest fabric you have worked with? What did you make and how did it go?
The first thing that leaps to mind was actually not for a corset. It was for a bustle gown that we were making. And this was very, very early on in my career as a costume maker. And I was listening to the client's words rather than their intentions. And she said, I want this fabric, which was a silk charmeuse. And I didn't know at that time to say, tell me what you like about this fabric, because she wanted the body of actually a silk duchess. So I just said, listened and heard, I want silk charmeuse. And I tried and tried and tried and tried to make that silk charmeuse behave like a heavier, weightier fabric, interfacing it, interlining it, like all of these processes, and eventually circled back around to throwing that out. And this is a time when, silk to me felt more precious than life. Throwing that out and finally buying a fabric that had the sheen that she wanted. And that's actually what she was asking for. She wanted this specific color and the shine of the silk charmeuse that was perfect, readily available in Silk Duchess. So that, yeah, I'm just never going to answer short and sweet. But one of the most important things that I've learned as a custom maker of corsets and costumes, wedding dresses, etc., is to really dial into what people are truly asking for, because a lot of people don't have the vocabulary that people that are working with fabric daily do. So they'll say, I want this, but they actually mean, I want this. And it's just a matter of finding all of the words so that you're actually speaking the same language.
All right, here's another simpler one. How do you store your archived corsets and previous collections?
We have a closet whose name is Narnia.
We're very original.
We for our garments, they are actually stored on hangers hanging up unless they're very, very delicate. We do have a place where we store things flat. For my antique corsets, I actually keep those stored in acid-free tissue inside of a vintage suitcase. And I also have some of my most favoriteest antique corsets at home, also stored in a very safe place in acid-free tissue. And then just for our archive of Dark Garden corsets, we keep them rolled up in the same direction as the curve of the body. So we roll them up and we keep them in little bags that are made exactly for corset sizes. So kind of like a long, skinny pillowcase.
Mm-hmm. All right. You mentioned your antique collection in passing. Do you ever work off of vintage corset patterns?
I do not work off of vintage corset patterns because modern bodies are so different from bodies in days past. It's a combination of completely different nutrition, different lifestyles, different exercise approaches, and also most of us didn't grow up wearing corsets. I started early, but I wasn't completely consistent the way that a young woman in the 19th century would have been. So my ribs, I don't believe, are shaped the way that that someone who had been wearing corsets since they were 10 would have been. So yeah, my whole thing about corsetry, what makes our corsets so comfortable, is that we're making corsets for human bodies and bodies right now. We're doing a lot of fittings so that we know how the corset is feeling and looking, as opposed to just basing them on dress forms or imagination or, pretty lines. Pretty lines have something to do with it, but that's not. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's the body that the corsets are going on that determine the shape. Cat Cam, what's she doing?
Cat Cam, I'm looking at the questions and deciding if I want
Oh,
to
okay.
skip around. And I'm going to jump to, if you could live or open a shop somewhere else, where would it be?
Where would it be? Where would it be? Well, I love Paris. But to be far more practical, I would actually love to have another boutique in Los Angeles. I'd love to have another boutique in Seattle, and eventually across the pond, across that great big ocean. Europe
Edinburgh.
inspires me very, very much.
What about New York? Not New York?
Oh yeah, totally.
Get ready for Dark Gardens 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right, I'll scroll back up, and I'm toggling 3 devices for you all today.
London, sure. Yes.
Let's do. Did you go to design school?
I did. It's funny because I went to 2 community colleges. Actually, I went to City College here in San Francisco, and also College of Alameda. And sometimes I'm embarrassed about that I didn't go to a school that with more notoriety. But I had amazing teachers in both of those schools, and one of them, Mrs. Spenza, was my millinery teacher at College of Alameda. And anyone who studied with Mrs. Spenza will just sing her praises. She was a woman of such incredible skill from Austria. I learned so much from her, and I really think that my training in millinery led to some of my skill with corset making. So the understanding bias, you get that a little bit more from hat making than you do actually just messing around with muslin. So yes, I went to design school. Also, my teacher at City College in San Francisco, Sandy Erickson, she was so inspiring also. She taught me to love Charles James. So I was at City College when I was 16, and she talked about design in a way that from a very, very practical point of view. She also, like I said, she introduced me to Charles James, Madame Cray, all of the mid-century designers, couturiers, and she also, in the 2 years that I went to school there, I never saw her repeat an outfit. So she sewed most of her clothes. She was so creative. She taught me a lot. So she's still around. Sadly, Mrs. Spenza is not.
Great. So while we're talking about your origin story, what about corsetry / design first interested you, and what still excites you about the industry today?
That could be a whole hour, couldn't it? I'm a little bit uncertain what exactly was the first spark because it was so early. I believe that one of the first things was actually Linda Carter as Wonder Woman. Her form was amazing.
Was it
She's
wonderful?
clearly fitted and padded. What was that?
Was it wonderful?
It was wonderful. And I love that she was really fierce while also being feminine. So I think that sent a big message to me. Um, and then growing up at Renaissance Fair and Dickens Fair, I feel like I lived most of my imaginative life in my head in England, in mostly in the 19th century. Um, so I was very historically informed from the start. Additionally, my mother encouraged me to wear a belt around my waist at night. I thought she was insane. And then, flash forward 15 years, I wish I'd listened to her. um, it would have made the kind of eventual corset training that much easier, probably. She also helped me make my first corset when I was 12. So, and then what excites me about the industry today, I love that we're still innovating. When I started the company in '89, everything was exciting. Gautier and Madonna were just rocking everything. Terry Mugler, just like their silhouettes were so unique. And again, that fierce femininity I found very inspiring. Through the 90s and aughts, I just kept waiting for corsetry to kind of reach its peak and then become not popular. And so I think what I'm excited about right now is that it has actually corsetry has made its way into the lexicon of fashion. So it the popular silhouette is going to continue to change, but I think that people really love corsets again and they're not afraid of them anymore. Of course, plenty of people are going to tell you all kinds of awful things about corsets that, la 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 la. myth, myth, myth. We don't need to go into that. But I love that innovation is continuing to happen for something that is kind of, in a lot of people's minds, considered archaic.
So if you want to build on something you just said, I'm going to scroll back and nab a question from the comments. Most of these questions were submitted ahead of time through our stories. But if you ask a question in the comments, we will try to fit it in. And we have one viewer who is a medic at events like Dickens. And sometimes people are wearing their corsets improperly or for other reasons. They might have a medical condition and the medic may have to take off the corset as quickly as possible. Is there a way to do that without just cutting the laces?
Hopefully untying them is untie and unclose, also called open from the front. Excuse the earthquake. My cat has walked on the careful balance of devices here. But do know that cutting the laces is actually a really, really good option if you absolutely must get out of the corset immediately, because they're 100% replaceable. It doesn't damage the corset at all. So I actually think that it's a really valid way to go. If the corset must come off instantly, please, please, please cut the laces, not the cloth.
Very good. Okay. I'm going to jump around again. Oh, okay. Maybe this one's easy. I think it's easy. What sewing machines do you use?
We use Singer single needle industrial machines. Singer and Juki. We've recently gotten a
Team
fabulous.
Juki. What? I'm Team Juki.
You are Team Juki, yes. I've become Team Juki as well, for sure. We, for the longest time, we only had the single needle, and by single needle, I mean also single ability. So that means the machine just goes forward and back in a straight line. A few of our machines actually didn't even go back. They just go forward very effectively, very efficiently. And we now have one machine that is a little bit smarter, and we can adjust the tension. And tension is like we've got two threads, and they interact with one another, and the top thread and the bottom thread tension need to be very specifically adjusted depending on the thickness and type of fabric. So that's one thing that it does. And you can also control things with knee and foot pedal, so you don't have to take your hands off of the garment itself. And that is kind of amazing. And that they have a little automatic thread cutter. Oh, it's dreamy. It's dreamy. And then we also, for leather sewing, we have a Mitsubishi industrial walking foot. So sometimes people ask, how should I sew leather? And in a perfect world, you should use a walking foot machine. If you do not have a walking foot machine, if you have a very, very strong home sewing machine, you can get a Teflon foot for it. And that will sort of kind of do the work of the walking foot. I will say that we burnt out our very first industrial machine at Dark Garden by using it for leather with the Teflon foot. Eventually it gave up. Marianne's raising her eyebrow. We did. If you can imagine a time before you worked there, Marianne.
There were plenty of times before I worked there.
Right. We're not going to talk about history and age.
I mean, we are, because one of the questions is, what is one of your most memorable DG moments to date?
Good grief. In 30 years, there are some spectacularly memorable moments. Jean-Paul Gaultier putting his hand on my waist and complimenting me. That's up there. Hi, Betsy. Mr. Pearl doing the same. Yeah, people whose work I truly admire, then admiring me in my work, not just me. But truly the things that are most meaningful to me are when people's lives are clearly affected for the better. And that's the thing that I really live for, that most of us at Dark Garden are really inspired by, is putting a corset on someone and seeing pain, whether it be emotional or physical, release, seeing the change that comes over them. That's really meaningful, memorable. Mm-hmm.
All right, here's another Sophie's choice for you. Do you have a favorite corset or corset style?
I'm one of those funny, kind of fickle people. Favorite never lasts very long. Like in security questions, like, what's your favorite actor? What's your favorite blah? I'm like, I can never remember those because my favorite changes. It's kind of like, what are you working on right now that inspires you? Is that kind of is in line with favorite. In the 30, more than 30 years that we've been doing this, I've gotten to work on exquisitely beautiful, incredibly challenging, very interesting, thought-provoking, so many incredible products. And I'm always looking forward to the next one as well. Last night I got to take a tour of one of our clients' closets with him to design a corset, to design his next corset. And I really wanted to see what he likes to wear. And through the power of Zoom, I was able to really have a good look around and see what moves him so that I can design specifically for him. So that kind of opportunity is really exciting and kind of juicy, I guess.
Um, I want to bring up something that you mentioned on our Patreon recently. And again, if you joined a little bit later, we're going to be bringing answers to questions like these to our Patreon, both at our $5 levels, which is Bone and Buskin Up, which is $50. So tune in there. But one thing that Autumn mentioned recently on Patreon that she's really excited to make is a carnival costume for a tiny dog. And she will be documenting that for our lacing patrons on Patreon.
Absolutely. One of my very dear friends, she's in New Orleans. Her fabulous tiny dog, Barbarella, has been crowned or will be crowned Queen of Barkus, Queen of the Mystic Crew of Barkus. And so I'm making a little bitty peacock inspired dress for this adorable dog who she's one of those very skilled dogs who knows if you're having an anxiety filled moment, and she'll just run over and sit on you and suddenly feel better. Um, so she's not certified, but she is a pretty remarkable little creature. So getting to play dress up with her is amusingly inspiring. So I picked out some fabrics and I'm going to be sharing those probably tomorrow. Today's very, very full.
So other than Barbarella, who are your current style and design inspirations other than our amazing and unique clients?
Oh, it's always client driven because my approach to design is very collaborative. I think that you, Marianne, and our other designer, Calico, um, there's kind of a sprouting of ideas, and I'm sure that it is you gain inspiration from hither and thither, and then they turn into design inspiration. My inspiration for things tends to be in conversation and is about someone's specific need. Whether that need is to look really, really spectacular for a specific event, or is about supporting their skeleton in a specific way. I get inspired by people's bodies, honestly. I've always been fascinated by the human form and how it can be molded, whether through diet and exercise or externally through corsetry. And then fabric inspires me as well. These days where we're not shopping in person so much, that area of inspiration is a little bit harder to find unless I actually open up my treasure boxes. I like this question. What artists inspire me? Any art form. I'm deeply in love with the work of the pre-Raphaelite painters, Rossetti being one of those. Lord Leighton is another. I toured his house in London a couple of times, and his workroom and his Turkish bath, that's some inspiration. Other artists that inspire me, I've mentioned Gautier at least twice already, maybe 3 times. Let's do it again. That man's genius, you know, so much creativity and light. What's happening at Alexander McQueen, even after his death, their work is just so pleasing to my eyes. I love it when people can incorporate beauty and imagination. And my goodness, that little poet laureate yesterday, inspiring in a totally different way. So, Other artists, I don't know, so many, so many. Yeah, I miss museums.
All right. Well,
One of those nouns, right?
totally, definitely a noun. Uh, Keeping it on a happier note and building on what you were just talking about. You mentioned being inspired by fabric sometimes. Do you have a favorite color or fabric to work with? I think I know your favorite color.
I love this color. And this color. Yeah, yeah. Uh, the color of good, healthy blood. Um, not a vampire. It's my favorite color. And favorite fabrics, that varies. It actually, it doesn't vary necessarily. It's specifically about the project. I absolutely adore really, really high quality velvets. Um, Silk as a fiber, it is capable of so many different things. Really good brocades. For corset making, one of the very meaningful lessons I got from working with Mr. Pearl is a very high quality brochet, which is a fabric that's made specifically for corset making, which does not seem to be made in this country. But it really does make a difference. I avoided coutil for a long time because the majority of the coutils when I was beginning corset making were coming from a mill, I think exclusively in England. And that mill, I'm not going to say this is any more the case, but at that time, coutil seemed to always be off grain, and it's a very solid fabric. So getting it on grain takes so much effort that I basically wrote it off. I said I didn't want to pay extra money for fabric that I have to put extra work into just because it's made for corset making. But when things are really good quality, yes, there's a reason.
I want to jump in, and you mentioned in passing silk as a fiber. And I want to quickly clear up a misconception that a lot of people have, which is that silk is a type of fabric and satin is a type of fabric. And silk is a thing that you make fabric out of, and satin is a way of making fabric. It's a weave. It's about the pattern of how the threads interlace with each other. So you can have silk satin and you can have polyester satin, and the same goes for many other types of weaves. So just so if you're watching this and you see something out there that says 100% satin, that's meaningless. If your shampoo is satin infused, that's meaningless. So just so you know, silk is a fiber. It is a raw component of fabric, and what defines the characteristics is how the silk was created and spun and how it's turned into the fabric that you eventually work with and wear.
Well said.
So
100% satin.
Autumn, what's something that will always be in fashion no matter how much time passes?
Beauty. But what defines it is going to change. I believe that the very specific waist hip ratio that interestingly Marilyn Monroe possessed naturally, that is a specific ratio that flips a specific switch in the human brain. So even if that's not fashionable, it's still going to appear beautiful. And it's kind of a mathematical equation related to, you're going to have the words for this, Marianne, probably. I'm wanting to say golden rule, and that's not quite it.
The golden ratio?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So close. We've got just a handful. We've got just a handful of questions left, so I'm kind of cherry picking here. let's go with, we just did a whole video on this one. How can I get into waist training?
Begin. The very first step to waist training is finding a corset that feels comfortable enough for you to wear frequently, regularly, because what makes waist training work is consistency, exactly like diet and exercise. I often say it's more important that you do something for a little while every day than for a long time, once a week or once a month. So again, that's why I recommend finding a corset style and size that fits you to a very comfortable point, because it will only work if you wear it. Just like our mask. Masks are only safe if you've got them over your nose and mouth.
Who knew? um, let's go with, do you have any other cool skills or hobbies?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Think about that one.
Well, we've got a few minutes, so I'm going to give the long answer, actually. So, I started the company when I was quite young, and I was 100% about costume and corsetry. Like anything I did always related specifically to that. If I was going to watch a movie, it was likely to be a historical drama. If I was going to go to a museum, it was because there was clothing that I wanted to see. There were articles of clothing that I wanted to see. That agrees. Um, and eventually, when my relationship broke up, I realized that I was rather narrowly focused and it was making me rather dull. Very good at what I did, but rather dull. And bit by bit, I started opening up my eyes to other things. And through a series of odd, I don't know, happenstances, I started doing aerial silk training. So going to the Circus Center here in San Francisco. And I went from not being very physically focused other than dance to being able to lift my own body weight repeatedly. And that really opened up my world in a lot of important ways. I've also always been interested in dance. My mother was a beautiful dancer, and she really hoped that I would follow in her footsteps. She did not want me to be a burlesque dancer, and that is the path that I chose for a while, but it was because it was incorporating a lot of the dance styles that I'd already studied. And I love swing dancing. I say it is the best fun you can have with your clothes on. And my fantastic beau is a tango dancer. He had already been studying tango for 4 years when we got together, and I have gotten to learn tango from him. And that's something that is very precious to me, to be able to do something that I'm able to do with him. If we have extra time, he'll teach me something new. So, yeah, I think physical practices are really important to me, and dance is one of those. I used to be all about yoga as well, but my first teacher was a Hungarian contortionist, and she saw my proclivity for flexibility and really trained that. And so I now have to be really careful that I don't injure myself, because that'll happen pretty easily, because my flexibility is a little bit overextended. Um, so yeah, dance. And I'm learning to cook. Thank you, COVID. I'm learning to cook.
Well, I'm going to ask a question then. What's your favorite thing to cook?
The thing that I am learning. I have a few friends who also enjoy cooking, and sometimes I'll just reach out to one of them and say, I have these 3 components. What would you make? And they'll send me a recommendation, and either I'll look it up in the one cookbook that I turn to, which is The Joy of Cooking, or good old internet, and go from there. I'm not super skilled, but I have learned that it's all about focus. Because when I was younger, I was vegetarian, and I can cook a mean tofu burger. However, I can't eat them anymore, so I've learned to translate some of those skills to other mediums. But yeah, I'm always about learning new things. I think that is my favorite thing. Learn something new.
So for people who want to get into new things like corset making or sewing in general, what advice would you have for them?
When people ask me about learning to sew, I recommend actually finding a physical pattern. Hi, Ben. I recommend finding an easy pattern like Easy Butterick or not Easy Vogue, Easy Butterick, Easy Simplicity, and follow the instructions to the T, and you will learn new skills. Sewing is about patience and determination. That's not quite the word I want. Stick-to-itiveness. Even if sometimes that means balling up your thing and throwing it in the corner and coming back 10 minutes later when you're not mad at it anymore. And don't go into corset making until you really know how to sew. God. Because corsets are some of the hardest things. Persistence, yes, that one. Thank you. Yes.
All right. And so if that's about the hands-on aspect of getting into sewing, what about tips for building relationships with people in the industry?
That's such a good question. I want to say be kind, because that will inspire kindness in others. Sorry about all the hesitation with this one. Having grown up in the historical costuming community, that was an incredibly divisive and competitive arena. I think it is slightly less so now. There's much more sense of community because of the internet, honestly. You can gain inspiration from others. There's so much more sharing of knowledge than there was when I was coming up. So I'm still learning that that this is something that's a lot more fun if you're sharing information with others rather than hoarding it like an evil dragon. And yeah, I think as far as like reaching out to people who inspire you, reach out with a respect of their time, and start with why you're reaching out to them in the first place. I recall, again, early on, somebody saying, Autumn, tell me how you make a pattern and for a corset. And because I was still coming from the very competitive world, I worked so hard for the knowledge that I had. My response to that was, I think your husband's kind of hot. What does he like for dinner? Um, because it just felt like such a thoughtless request for me to just share my hard-won knowledge. Um, so to kind of balance that out with a little more kindness and be more in the spirit of sharing information, perhaps I am working on this project. I'm having a hard time with this specific thing. Do you have time to give me some advice or something like that? But if you say, I want to get into exactly your field, tell me how to do it, why would I do that? So just be respectful, end of the day, in all relationships.
Um, so, and with that question in mind, you may not want to answer the next question, which is, what's some insider knowledge that only people in your line of work have? Um, and I think you could probably come up with some fun answers to this that are not very secret sauce related, but
Oh, goodness.
I'm thinking
Insider.
about like maybe something to do with the process of working with celebrities and stylists. You could probably drop a little factoid about what that's like, or
Working with celebrities and stylists. I will say something that a lot of people don't realize is that movie industry, music industry, they're always working with a deficit of time. There's never any kind of cushion, it seems like. So if you are excited about working with celebrities, know that it is going to lead to sleepless nights and quite possibly an overextension of your own resources. Um, it is not always the case. Sometimes people do give you enough time and money to do a project, but it feels quite rare. Um, yeah, I'm not going to say I'm bitter, but maybe a little bit
cautious.
cautious. Yes, cautious. And I think this sort of feels like a time to bring up something that I'm always a response when I speak with fashion students, because I am frequently asked by fashion students, like basically, here I am, I'm launching myself into the world of fashion design. Um, what's the most important thing to learn? And that is learn to manage your time. Learn to understand if you think it is going to take an hour to do something, find out how long your hour is, if it's actually an hour or if your hour is actually 4 hours long. And that is to say, you look at what a project looks like and you have a sense of how long it's going to take. Almost everyone takes at least twice as long as they think. Sometimes 3 or 4. So again, learn what your reality is around your own time estimation. I'm actually working on a series of blog posts right now that I'm releasing on Medium specifically about work as a custom clothier. And a lot of these questions, a lot of my hard-won knowledge is going to be shared there. And I talk about time a lot and knowing yourself, knowing your own capabilities, knowing what your skill level is. So again, if you're estimating time around a project, do you actually know how to do all of the things that you're going to need to do in this project? And if there's some unknown stuff, then at least give yourself 4 times as much time as you think it's going to take.
Something that's coming to my mind as I'm reading the comments and putting together what you're talking about just now with what you were on before, with the idea of someone coming up to you and saying, tell me how you make a corset pattern. I think also like you can take that back to one of my favorite things to say at the shop is about the old adage, teaching a man to fish as opposed to just giving him fish. And if someone gives you the formula, that might sound like teaching a man to fish, but it's not. It's just giving them the fish, because if you didn't go through the drudgery of developing that formula and being involved in the fittings that led to that patterning process, then it's not effective knowledge that you're really going to have ingrained in your own process. And so the struggle really is part of getting the skill. Someone can't just put it in a textbook for you and then you feel like you might think but you don't know at the same level. So sometimes there's also a good reason to hold back a little bit, because then you're gonna get boxed in by this narrow way of like, well, the godmother of modern corsetry said this is how she does her patterns, so I'm just not going to question it. I'm not going to develop things. And one thing I noticed when we were working with Mr. Pearl was he has such a very specific process that he follows, and it's all of the things put together that create that process. And if you change one thing, then that changes a bunch of other variables. So if you're changing your core fabric that you're using for your strength layer, then that might change your seam method. That might change the amount of ease that you want, or negative ease in certain places. So I think it all just really, it ties back in with really building the knowledge yourself, including how long something takes. Definitely something that I think is so important. I'm like the OCD, I write down my time for everything person, and it has made such a difference for me actually knowing how long I'm going to spend doing something at work, so that other people can base their part of the process around my availability and ability to present the previous step to them.
So well said. I think kind of summarizing that is it takes 10,000 hours of doing something to achieve mastery. And that's not 10,000 hours of reading about it. That's the doing.
Yeah.
Well,
We've got, it's 11. There's 2 more questions. One of them we've kind of answered, so we can gloss over it, unless there's anything else you want to say about how you got started being interested in historical dress. You've already touched on your roots with Dickens and Ren Fair. So we can end with just a little frivolous one, which is, what was the best thing that happened to you this day/week/year? I mean, considering what day it is today and what day yesterday was, I think I know, but.
Absolutely. But I'll answer that because we got that question in 2020. I think one of the skills that I gained because specifically of the pandemic was some self-reflection and ability to look at what I have learned and how far I have come. Most artists have a dreadful case of imposter syndrome, and I, like everyone else, struggle with that. And learning to work through that to present myself as someone who actually knows what they're doing, because I do. I mean, it's still a practice, but acknowledging that it is okay also to know what I know and be solid with that.
So in conclusion, go to our Patreon.
In conclusion, go to our Patreon and you can watch my process.
And just so you know, we keep bringing up the Patreon, it's because we have a special offer on Patreon that is ending today. If you are a patron at the lacing level or higher, you can get a free copy of our super gorgeous, and of course I don't have one in front of me, our super gorgeous lookbook of what we're calling the Alembic shoot, because that's where it was photographed, the Alembic on Haight Street. It's a gorgeous bar, and Max Johnson did the photography, and our models were Frankie Fictitious, who is or was in our little live stream chat earlier, Edie Eve, Gothlet, and Alada Boutte. So they're all super amazing people, super gorgeous, beautiful corsets, and some of the pictures we had edited just so we could include them in the book, so they weren't shown on our website or our social media before that. And it's just such a lovely, like, little mini, it's 6 by 9. So it's a really good size where it's not going to take up your whole coffee table if you live in one of these dinky little San Francisco apartments. It's such a great piece. And so that offer ends today. Go to our Patreon and join at the lacing level or higher, and you can get a free copy of that. And of course, all access to all the other Patreon things that you get at that level, which is mostly focused on behind the scenes stuff. So we'll show you previews from the workroom, Autumn's little carnival dog costume in progress, new fabrics that we get in, new products in development before they make it out onto the floor where you can buy them. So I hope you come check out Patreon.
Yes, please. So thank you very much for sticking around with us. And I think that's all for now. Thank you so much, Marianne, for your help with this. I really appreciate it. And thank you, all of you.